Good afternoon, Keepers of the Cash. Gary B, the Casual Comic Guy here. And today we have Savage Saturday number 10. And we're going to be reviewing The Cimmerian, the Frost Giant's daughter. And this is the Ablaze reprints from the European publications. And so far they haven't knocked it out of the park for me with their adaptations. This one was a little bit better. I still had some issues with it though, but we'll get into that. And right off the bat, I want to say the cover art in this series was better than the cover art for the first 3 series that they did. So you had this nice Wolverine homage cover, which is kind of a meta homage, right? Because the Wolverine cover was by John Buscema, who worked forever on Conan. He also did he did just everything at Marvel. But he's most well known for Conan. He just made the definitive look for Conan. And then he had that incredible Wolverine #1 cover, which is a classic cover. And this is an homage to that cover. So you got Conan homaging Wolverine, drawn by John Buscema, who originally drew Conan for Marvel. So it's kind of a super meta cover. So really cool. Another cover for issue 1, a beautiful painted cover. We got issue 2. Another issue 2. Mercado. And then we have issue 3. Another issue 2, sorry, the third issue 2. And then right now I only have one cover. It's a Panosian cover for issue 3. I got to go pick up a couple more covers because they actually had some other nice covers. They had a few covers I didn't like. They had another Wolverine homage cover where it just looked silly and I wasn't invested in it. But you can only pick up so many different covers of each book, right? The collecting 4, 5, 6 different covers for each book is pricey. But we're going to get down into this. So, issue 1. Here's my problems with issue 1. We're going to start with the issues, right? So, and I'm going to show pictures over here describing what I'm talking about. But in issue 1, and again, this is an adaptation from a Robert E. Howard story. And this whole first issue, except for the last page or 2 pages, is fluff. It's all an introduction that they wrote leading up to the story by Robert E. Howard, which is in no way needed. It doesn't add to the story. It doesn't expand the story in any way that matters. And you spend most of the time away from our title character. And they spend time with this group of guys, which you'll see at the end of the book. And I get it. They're trying to fill these guys out, give them a little more backstory. But no one wants their backstory. I don't care for their backstory. They're not characters that have any impact on this story whatsoever. So why they chose to expand on it and include it, I'm going to guess, is to make 3 issues when this could have been a 2-issue adaptation. Maybe even a 1-issue adaptation. But hey, they got us for an extra $4 by adding another issue. And what struck me as weird about this is they've had other stories that warranted more issues than what they gave them. And they still limited it to 3 issues, right? This one didn't warrant 3 issues, but they expanded it to include 3 issues. So it's kind of mind-boggling, the thought process. You have a story that you're adapting in a previous arc that calls for more issues, such as Red Nails. That would have been better if it was expanded a little, and they could have spent less time cutting stuff out and changing things up to adapt the story a bit more faithfully. This one, they still lack the faithfulness of the story adaptation, and then they expand on that with characters that you're not tied to or care about. And more than that, they make the characters rude and crude. I get it. It's a Hyborian age. And I'll show you a picture of the characters over here. And then they go as far as to write more interactions with these characters with another warrior. One character pisses in another character's face, and for no reason, it doesn't. They had a reason in the story. None of that adds anything to this story. It's all a detractor. It's just fluff that doesn't need to be there. And again, my issue with the Ablaze imprint and their republications of these comics is these comics really stray for something that's billed as an uncensored adaptation to Robert E. Howard's original material. They really stray from the original material. If that's your billing, and if you're including the original material in the back of the book, I'm going to expect you to stay pretty on point with it. And if you're not on point with it, you're going to lose me. But I'm a fool. I keep spending the money. It's Conan. I keep hoping for the best. I keep hoping for more to happen. Something more faithful. And it hasn't happened yet. So this whole first issue, except for the first 2 pages, are all fluff added to a Robert E. Howard story that doesn't need anything added to it. The Robert E. Howard story, as written, is fine. And if you guys have read Robert E. Howard, you understand right away, just from his prose and his writing, that there is more than enough to adapt and show in an adaptation, because Howard's not short on words, he's not short on describing, and his descriptions are colorful enough and full enough where you get a full mental picture of what he's talking about. Now, right away, once they do start the story in the last 2 pages, and I'll show panels of that here, is you have Conan uttering his words to the guy that he's fighting. And they're different. From the very start of the Robert E. Howard story, there's nothing wrong with how those words are written, and it should have been a straight copy and paste that dialogue right over to Conan. The way Robert E. Howard wrote those 2 sentences, it puts you in that time period, it explains the type of person Conan is, and it lets you know. The way they're written here sounds more like something that was taken from today's age, and right away it doesn't ring true. When you read, and I'll show you Robert E. Howard's original phrasing and compared to this, and I think you'll agree with me. So enough about issue 1. Issue 2, more fluff. Now here's where the adaptation ends, where they're giving you the original print, because the story is actually a pretty short story. So they spent 2 issues printing the adaptation in here, but they expanded it with 3 issues, which wasn't warranted. I know I went on about that. This is issue 1 still. So issue 2. So issue 2, again, the art in issue 2 is beautiful. The art took a giant leap forward in this series. Everything else kind of just stayed on par for me. Issue 2 is, the whole issue is spent being lewd, and I can only guess that they're doing that to earn their uncensored rating. And I'm no stranger to lewd. Lewd doesn't bother me unless you're doing it gratuitously and watering down the story, which is all this issue does. It just spends most of the time trying to focus on the Frost Giant's daughter's nudity, her doing various acts of pleasuring herself, and if it was a story about that, based around that, fine, but it's not. It's a story about Conan, about his survival ability, his indomitable will to persist and go on. Her lewdness has nothing to do with that story, so it made no sense to have it in there. So now you have, out of a 3-issue adaptation, you have 2 issues of mostly fluff, and 1 issue that's just fluff, that's R-rated fluff, just to earn the uncensored rating. I don't mind uncensored. I don't mind R. I don't mind beyond R. It's got to be adapted properly, and it's got to fit the story. It does not here. And if you want to look at a pretty drawn character that's naked for most of an issue, then have at it. I was hoping for a more faithful adaptation. I didn't get it. And so we're going to get on to issue 3, which wraps up the story. In issue 3, changes something fundamental. They make the Frost Giant's daughter's 2 brothers, which Conan does battle with. Again, meant to show Conan's savagery, his indomitable will to survive, and his unwillingness to be defeated no matter what the situation is. And he fought 2 giants, as in the Robert E. Howard story, which they're supposed to be adapting. He fights 2 frost giants with axes, chainmail like him, and they're just these giant imposing beings, and Conan's got to kill them to survive and live on. And here, they make them bears. Are 2 giant bears supposed to be more imposing than 2 guys with battle axes? And they're supposed to be her brothers. I get it. They transform, maybe. Who knows? But they never show them. And I'm going to show you the original, the Frank Frazetta, and I'll show you the issue number 16, Barry Windsor Smith art, which I think is far superior. And I think lended to the story better to have them adapted from the Robert E. Howard text. Now, they keep billing themselves as these uncensored, more faithful adaptations, and I haven't seen it so far. So far, the stuff that Roy Thomas adapted is much more faithful, much more true, and I think much more related to the original feel of the Robert E. Howard stories. So, cover art on this series, I'll give an A. It's a good, solid cover art. There's a few covers I didn't care for, but most of the covers I thought were really good. Story, I'm going to give it a C. It's not really, it's an interpretation. It's not an adaptation. It's someone changing it too much. I expect an adaptation to be more faithful. Unless it's in cinema, then you got to make certain allowances. I don't think you necessarily need to do that when you're translating from a novel to comic form. There's usually enough descriptors in the original novel to let you know. So I didn't agree with many of their choices and how they interpret it, and I didn't agree with all the fluff, so that's why the story gets a C. Conclusion of the story is the last page is pretty much the last bit from the book. So the conclusion I'll give a B, although there was a lot of fluff in there, just pages and pages. And when Conan's fighting the 2 bears, when he should be fighting the 2 frost giants in chainmail, helmets, and an axe, it detracted. And not only did that detract, they spent 3 pages with Tom, which was supposed to be the beating of Conan's savage heart, showing his will to survive. And all it did was muddy up the art, cover up the art, and you didn't really get to see a battle. Every single page of that fight was covered with this Tom's supposed to be driving home Conan. If you tell the story properly, you don't need all that fluff wording on there. We'll get the savagery. We'll get his will to survive. Draw it in his face. Don't give me a bunch of heartbeats on a page that cover up all the art that you want us to see. So it really detracted from that for me too. So, I'm gonna change my conclusion to a B- because those 3 pages really just kind of pissed me off, and I really didn't like the change from 2 giant brothers to 2 giant bears. It just absolutely no reason for it, except for someone to say, this is my spin on it. Well, it's not. You're supposed to be adapting Robert E. Howard. If you're going to adapt them, adapt them. If you're going to do your own spin, market it as such. And I know the word adaptation leaves a lot of room for play, but when it's in a comic medium, I expect it to be a bit more faithful. So overall, one other thing I want to mention is the depiction of Conan's physicality. He is pictured as savage, but he is way too big in this series. So the Frost Giant's daughter takes place at the beginning of Conan's wanderings, right? He had just fought in Venarium. He's young. He's still a teenager. They have him drawn like a 30-year-old man. He's buff, he's huge, he's big. And Conan, as written by Howard in that time, was a much more lithe, agile, and still strong corded muscles like a bear, but he didn't have the frame that they're giving Conan in this adaptation. So I see this cover, I think of Conan in his late 20s to early 30s. This is Conan before he hit 20. This is Conan at 17, 18 years old, wandering and beginning his journey. And they didn't depict it as such, which, again, another knock for me. Now, I know people who love this adaptation of it, and I know people who love the adaptation but aren't familiar with the original story, and a couple that like the original story and like the adaptation. Unfortunately, I'm still not one of them. Blaze has not won me over, but they've still got all my money, so they win. So, and they'll continue to get it because it's Conan. I'm going to keep giving it a shot, and the next series looks good too. I'm going to try it, and I'll give my honest opinion on that too. But that's Savage Saturday 10 for now, guys. I know this one went on a bit long. I had 3 issues to discuss and a lot of things to take care of. So until next time, guys, keep it casual.